Hello and welcome everyone to Happy Hour with me. I am Eileen Cook. This is the Creative Academy time when we talk all things crafty, and it is Wednesday morning, February 13th. So I hope everyone realizes that this is half price off Valentine's Day candy Eve. So make sure you get yourselves out to the store on the 15th because that's when all the good stuff will be on sale. So that is worthwhile to do. So before we jump into anything else this morning, did anyone have any specific questions they wanted tackled? So one thing I did want to tackle that I actually already answered for Cynthia, but I think it's a useful thing, so I'm going to tackle it while it's out loud for other people, is Cynthia has been working on a middle grade, and she went through and had worked on that book actually in the SFU program, had a nice solid draft of it, and then went through and paid and had a developmental editor go through it, which gave her lots of thoughts and feedback, and she's gone through and basically revised it again. And the question was, like, is it useful to have the same editor look at it or to have a different editor look at it? And did you want to say kind of why you were thinking that, Cynthia? Like, what was in your head on that?
Well, I thought my gut tells me I should find someone else. But of course, this is me just kind of blazing my own trail. So I'm not really, I don't have experience to fall back on and how it could and should work. But I feel like I had some really good feedback in the first go round. And I strongly recommend that for people who have finished a manuscript. I thought it was really great. And then somebody came back and said, yeah, but nothing ever happens. I'm like, wait, what? What do you mean nothing ever happens? It's full of action. So anyway, I did need to go and rework it. And I essentially rewrote the story and, eliminated some characters and tried to develop some things a little bit further. So I feel like it's different. And if I send it back to the same person, I don't know how valuable the feedback would be, because I feel like this is I think they would be looking at it with the old story eyes, and this is a new story in my view, based on those comments. And I take them all on board, but I did do a rewrite and brought in some other ideas. So that's it.
So I've already weighed in, so Cynthia knows my opinion on this, but I'm curious if you other two have thought, if you were in a situation, would you want shies or would you want a repeat? It's not really a repeat because it's
I think that's a really interesting question, because I think when you're lucky enough to have a group of people that you trust around you to read your stuff, I make the assumption that you guys are being honest with me.
That was your first mistake, Christy, right?
Yeah, you're just being darn nice, right? So I think there is a trust in there, and I think, like, when I reread something, I think I am looking at it with fresh eyes, but it also, I think you can also use the knowledge that you had from that previous version to go, yeah, this is working better, or maybe it's not working as well too, right? So so I think there's pros to having that trusted group, but I can also see Cynthia's point about, having some new fresh eyes, but then are you going to get like a whole totally new perspective that's going to send you off into another area of the galaxy? I think that would be my fear, because as we've talked about so many times before, you give this to 50 people, you'll get 50 different directions. And I'm tired of exploding, personally.
No more explosion for you, Chris.
No more explosion.
You're done.
And Eileen, I know you can relate to that. So that's all I have to say. What do you think, Bonnie?
Well, I have found that it's hard to find someone that you really connect with and trust their opinions on your manuscript. So if you've actually found someone that you really like their feedback, I can't see that they would give you, oh, this is different. Oh, this is different. They would give you good feedback back. You already know that because you've already dealt with them. So my tendency would be to go with the same one. However, there is always benefits to go, but I think I would use that for your beta readers, not your editor.
So, and this is, yeah, well, and that's why I asked you guys. This is one of those lovely things where I don't actually think there is a right or wrong answer, which is the beautiful thing about it. And I have done both. And that is why like the thing that resonated most with me that Cynthia said was, my gut is telling me. And when my gut is telling me something, I think one of the things that I am learning is listen. Listen. There is something to that where at some level you're getting that. So obviously there's pros and cons. So let's just kind of look at those briefly. So the pros of going back to someone who's read your work before is they will see the changes that have happened. So they'll be able to say, like, I really liked how you amplified the conflict in this particular scene, but I think you can still push it further. Or now I'm wondering if this is happening. Now that you fixed this, it didn't, it changed this other thing. So that's something else that we need to look at. So they have a bit of a history. As Bonnie said, if you found someone that you trust, that goes a long way, because it is kind of, I think, hard to not only find someone that you trust, but whose working style, and edits are, it's a very weird thing. I've gotten really good edits from people where I wouldn't say that I didn't trust them, but I just felt like there wasn't a click. Like, I thought they gave me good notes. I thought they had good feedback. I learned a lot from the process, but I wasn't sure that they got me as a writer. I wasn't sure that they understood what I was trying to accomplish with the story. And I will freely admit, I'm weird. Like, I don't need someone to be like, you're wonderful, you're fabulous, but I do need some positive feedback in there, or I will despair. So I need to know that there's going to be some amount of positive mixed in there. And sometimes someone's just style is just a good fit for me. So if you find that, that's a really valuable piece. And now we're all going to have a moment where we hate Marianne because she's sitting poolside. She had to turn her camera off because we're now on to her in a warm and sunny location while I'm wearing a turtleneck and I'm still cold. Okay.
So
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So how important is it then if you've written a manuscript, you sent it out to beta readers, you did some fine tuning, you sent it to an editor, it came back, and you started to have a rethink about it and essentially rewrote the story. Should you be sending it out again to like square one, beta readers all over again?
I think it's a personal choice. I think some people do, and they're like, and again, sometimes beta readers is where I'm often looking for lots of new people to weigh in because they won't have any past history with the story. So sometimes those can be great people to be like, what do you think of this? I think one of the cons of getting different people to weigh in is one of the things that Christy talked about, which is, and I have been through this experience, I had an editor leave a house once. So I had one editor that had acquired the manuscript, sent me an editorial letter. I, worked through all the changes. I turned it in then to a new editor because the previous editor had left. And the new editor was like, you know what I would like? And then she listed basically all the things that had been in the initial draft. And I was like, yeah, okay, then I guess we'll just change it back to what we had. Although, to be honest, it was an interesting process because I still did keep some of the changes that the initial editor had made because I think she was right. And, kind of then did integrate some of those things. And that was a little bit of a different situation in that it wasn't an editor that I had hired. It was an editor at the publishing house. So in that case, while you are not beholden to take their recommendations, they are the person who's making the ultimate choice to publish the novel. So you are, I think, are in a bit of a different situation than if you've hired someone who's made suggestions you don't agree with. You can be like, okay, thank you. Like, it's, I wish I hadn't just paid you money for an opinion I didn't want. But other than that, you're really kind of not behind. But also sometimes getting those different opinions is a reinforcement in a positive sense, because it does remind you of how completely subjective this business is. So for what for one person worked, for someone else isn't going to work. And I think that puts a lot more confidence in you as a writer to start having the feeling like, what is the story that I'm trying to tell? And that is something like, Marianne and I have had a discussion once before where she was working on a book and someone was like, well, you can't do that in romance. And so there was, a lot of debate about can you or can't you? And like in the end, it really, what it fundamentally comes down to is people are giving you an opinion, and it is well worthwhile to listen to that opinion because they're usually giving it for a reason. Although there are some who are just spouting off for no good reason. But at the end of the day, sometimes thinking about but is that the story I fundamentally want to tell? And if the answer to that is no, then you got to go with your gut. Cynthia.
So we had this conversation in my Brussels Writers Circle about, and actually outside the circle, not while we're in the circle.
Not the sacred circle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. About giving feedback. And I feel like there are different camps, and some people think that their role is to provide feedback to, not for the story that they would like to see the author write, but to make the story that the author has written better. And I'm like, well, that's a very subjective sort of line, I think, because we all read something and make judgments about how it could have been better. And isn't that then just being the story that we would like to see told and not the story that the writer is trying to tell? What's your thought on that?
I think it is very hard. And I know that I struggle with this when I'm giving someone feedback. I pause at two different points. So one point that I pause in is if I find myself just flipping pages. And I had this most recently because I was reading some of Bonnie's pages, and it was the end of a book, and Bonnie and I have been working on, we've been working on it together. Bonnie's actually been doing all the heavy lifting. I've just been reading it and sort of been like, this is what I do. But I was so excited to see how that story was going to end. I was just reading, and I had to stop myself and be like, no, go back and read it like an editor. Is she telling you the story in the best possible way? And sort of slowing myself down. So sometimes if I'm really enjoying a story, I have to stop myself and ask myself, am I being as critical as that person is asking me to be? It is much easier for me to be critical if it's a story that I'm not necessarily interested in, as strange as that sounds, because I don't get caught up in the story. And that is kind of fundamentally what I think is true about all writing, is that story trumps everything. If someone is interested in your story, they will forgive you all manner of problems. Look at the Da Vinci Code. The dialogue and the characters in that could not be clunkier, but the plot just races along and it's a fun read. And people don't, there are people who obviously criticize that book, but certainly tons of people love it. Twilight, if you want a really great example, look at 50 Shades of Grey. That book could not be clunkier and in so bad need of a good editor. And because it's probably not something that I traditionally read, I don't read a lot of erotica. For me, I painfully could not get through that book because I wasn't caught up at all in the story. For me, it was just the writing, and the writing was, in my opinion, not as well executed as it could be. I think one of the challenges that we sometimes have when writers are reading someone else's book is that we stop and we start having the game that we can't help but play, which is what if? What if this happened? Well, what if that? Ooh, we know what would be interesting is what if that happened? And that is our story brain. That is what we are hardwired as writers to do. I can't watch the news without thinking like, oh, what if you did this? What if you did that? What if that happened? What if, like I'm on the C bus and I'm watching two people have a discussion, I'm thinking about it. So when I read someone's story, it's very hard not to start thinking like, what would I do with that story? And splitting that out to what would I do because I find that interesting versus what would I do because I think it serves the story better is a very fine and fuzzy line. There are some things where I feel very confident, where I can be like, I feel like we've entered info dump territory here to me. And there will be some people I'll actually put in the margins. You're getting away with it because I'm interested, but it's still an info dump. So you might want to think about that. Marianne.
Just thinking about feedback that I've gotten on various manuscripts over the years that have caused me a little bit of angst about whether to heed that advice or not. And if it seems to fall into two categories, and it causes me a lot of difficulty. So one is that my character isn't likable enough. And the other part of that is that the character is making decisions that are maybe ethically in a gray zone. That like a really good person wouldn't do that, or a really nice person wouldn't do that. And I'm always torn between, am I just like an ethically gray, not very nice person who writes characters that other people are never going to like? Or do I want to push that line because I don't want to write Mary Sue's all the time, and people do actually do ethically gray things, and they're all not 100% nice. Everybody's on a continuum, and it depends on the context and their motive and maybe how wounded they are and all these things. And I have a really hard time with that because I want everyone to like me. So I think, okay, I guess I have to fix all these not perfect characters. But then I'm like, well, then everybody's going to just call me a Mary Sue and dismiss me for any kind of literary ability because all my characters are these perfect dolls. So anyway, I'll just put that out there. I don't know the answer, but I suffer struggling with what the right thing to do and whether to take the advice or not, when it's like that.
All right. So this is where I feel like, do we have an intervention where people tell Marianne, you're not a nice person? Someone finally had to tell you, Marianne. As you sit poolside right now, I'm not sure I like you very much, mostly because I am consumed with envy. But the first thing I would say is I get a lot of the same feedback. So I don't know if that makes you feel better that you're not alone. But I am fascinated with complicated people. And I think for me, that comes from the fact that I worked as a counselor. So people were often telling me the stuff that maybe they don't always tell other people. So thoughts that they have that are not so nice, or things that they have done that they're not so proud of, that they're working through. And as I meet those people, I realize that it's complicated. Yes, there are people that are just, really nasty, horrible, awful people. But there are a lot of people out there that I think are fundamentally good people who make really bad decisions. And for me, that's what I want to read about, is that, because I find that interesting. And maybe the same as Marianne, it's because I'm struggling with my own acknowledgments and awareness of my own weaknesses. But to be honest, I think a lot of people sometimes lie to them. They do something that's not nice, but they convince themselves why it is nice or why they're justified to do it in a way that's very different, rather than maybe acknowledging it. So I think it comes down to two different, well, actually, we're going to say multiple different things. We'll see how many we come across with. So the first is, I think one of the challenges that you butt up against sometimes, Marianne, is that you're writing in the romance genre, which skews towards what I would consider kind of almost fantasy reading, which is like, I want to imagine that I'm on vacation with Marianne and some billionaire, secret billionaire, sees me poolside and we strike up a conversation, and then we have this wonderful romance that, and the end of the thing, I marry him on his yacht. And so there's a lot of I think romance where you're going into it with the idea of wish fulfillment, and we want to see ourselves as nice people. So we want to see the main character as this likable heroine who is doing these things that we, of course, would want to do, and then getting that ultimate payoff for it. I think when you look at women's fiction, and I think, you know, your books border that, Marianne, I would actually classify the things of yours that I've read as more women's fiction, where I think there's a much bigger openness and interest in kind of that gray zone. So if you look at something like a Jodi Picoult, is a great example of some people who do some very complicated situations. Some of Jacqueline Michard's books also fall into that category, I think, where there are, you know, people making, you know, interesting ethical choices. You know, I certainly write domestic thrillers, which, you know, to a large degree, what I'm interested in is who are you when the chips are really down? Like, you know, we're all, you know, like to see ourselves as, you know, good people and all those kind of situations. But if you found yourself in a really complicated, dark place, would you keep making those same choices, or would you do something? And then how do you live with that, which I think is fascinating. So one part is, I think, genre expectations that you might be bumping up against. And I'm curious about potentially broadening out who you have as early readers, and maybe seeking out some people who are, you know, big fans of more women's fiction versus the romance genre might somewhat just skew the kind of feedback that you're getting. Secondly, which is something I know that you think about and put actually a lot of thought into in your books, but just in general as feedback for people, is if you're having a character make a choice that is maybe not a great choice, or is morally or ethically gray or even wrong, I think you're going to have to, if you want the reader to have any empathy for that character, that is, you don't want them to find them a sociopath, then you're going to have to really lay the groundwork about what their motivation is to do that. Whether that's you've clearly identified the wound in their past that has led them to this decision, or we see, you know, kind of how that slippery slope, like they told one lie to one person, and then to cover up that lie, they had to tell another lie. And then the next thing they knew, they lied about something else, and now they're way in over their head. So something where the reader has some empathy, like, oh, that got out of control. And I understand, like, now they're in that situation, and what are they going to do? I wrote a book, The Hanging Girl, which has been getting rebranded. So it got rebranded. I'll show you a shiny new cover. It's coming out in paperback, and it's being called One Lie Too Many. And in that book, the main character makes some very questionable decisions. And the biggest one is that she's pretending to be a psychic, and she's actually not. She's making up her predictions. And she has given some predictions about a girl who is missing in their town that's helpful to the police. But the truth of the matter is she's involved in the abduction. And it's supposed to be kind of a quick get rich kind of thing that is quickly spinning out of control. And I wanted to set up, obviously what she should do is go to the police. That is the correct decision when the things have spun out of control, and be like, look, I have to come clean. This is what's happened. But I did try and set up some reasons why she hasn't done that. So one is she doesn't want to go to jail. So she is concerned about that. She is a teenager. We don't make good decisions. But one of the pieces of backstory that I put in is that her dad had scampered off when she was born. And I had that growing up, she lied to everyone she went to school with and said that her dad was in the military, and that's why he wasn't around. And then one day, for whatever reason, she said, yeah, no, he got injured. Like he lost his legs, like in this roadside thing, because she, you know, and she gets all this attention for it. And then, of course, what she doesn't know is people are like so horrified by this that the community comes together, and there's this sudden school assembly with, you know, people waving American flags, and all these businesses have donated money so that she can visit her poor legless father in the VA hospital, and she has to come clean in front of the entire school that the truth of the matter is her dad is just a mechanic 2 towns over who never wanted anything to do with her. So because she got called out for this lie as a kid, which was, I mean, can you imagine how fundamentally horrifying that would be? Like to have to be staying for the school and your mom is there like, you said your dad is what? And you're like, okay, funny story. It all started really easy. And, you know, there's a big giant cardboard check from the local Walmarts and everybody, you know, the local TV news is there and you have to confess like, no, it's just that my dad doesn't want anything to do with me. I lied. So because she's had this horrifying, horrible experience, I think she is very remiss in wanting to kind of step forward again. And so there's fundamentally a question for her of, if I can get away without telling the truth, I want to do that because I'm already kind of branded as a liar in this town. And this is just another one. And again, it's a situation that has spiraled out of her control that was not her, to say not her fault, but that might be going too far. Not entirely her fault. So what I really wanted is for the reader to have that kind of empathy, which while they may disagree with her, and I have no doubt people would be screaming in the background, girlfriend, go to the police. Like there's murder afoot here. You have to come forward. Like she cannot do that. And then I kept trying to layer in reasons and eventually, her way of trying to come forward and figure out what she's going to do gets more and more complicated as the story goes on. So if your character is making hard and difficult choices, one way to make them, if not likable, is to make them empathetic, which is where the reader is willing to sort of be like, I get that. I may not agree with it, but I get that. The other option that you have is you go for broke and you make them just so delightfully evil that it's just fascinating to see what the heck they're going to do or how they're going to justify it. I mean, that's why people like Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, is he's just deliciously evil. Like the stuff he taught, like I'm going to eat them with fava beans and a nice Chianti. Like he's just creepy and horrible, but he's also extremely well educated and articulate. And he's so psychopathical. It's sort of fascinating. Gone Girl is another one where like you just kind of can't believe what these characters are saying and doing. But by God, they're fascinating. So you will continue to kind of keep going. Now, those are not the characters that Marianne has. Her characters I would not describe as Hannibal Lecter-ish at all. To me, they would fall into that category of I find them empathetic. I understand, but making sure that you are putting in there why they're doing it. And then lastly, which is I am coming to discover is one of the hard things, is letting go of some people then who just aren't going to be your readers. There are people who are reading because they want classic heroes or heroines. And at the risk of sounding maybe a tiny bit sexist, I think people are much more understanding of the flawed male character than they are the flawed female character. So a hero who, occasionally does bad things but has the heart of gold, a Han Solo, is roguish and attractive and, this, that, and the other thing. But a female character who does it is sometimes maybe a bitch. And you see that play out in real life. Like if you look at politics, the stuff that a male candidate can say or get away with versus what a female character says or female politician can say or get away with is very, very different. So it is something to consider, but I have come to a point where I am embracing my inner dark side. I like those complicated people. I like seeing how they're going to get themselves out of that situation. I like seeing how they got themselves into that situation. And those tend to be the books that I enjoy the most, are those sort of flawed character books. But I also acknowledge, and I do get them, I get a lot of reviews where people are like, I didn't like her main character. Because YA has some of the same problems as romance, which is, I think characters are sometimes expected to be likable. And mine often aren't. Or I think what I find hard is I find them eminently likable. I like them even though they're making bad decisions, because I really feel like I understood that. So Sky in The Hanging Girl / One Lie Too Many, I felt horrible for her. And maybe again, it is that thing of never, like for clarity, never to the same degree. But I was someone in high school who would tell lies sometimes to try and be more interesting, like never on the scale, like for clarity of that girl. But, you know, there would be times where I would get myself into trouble where someone would be like, but I thought you said this thing happened on Friday. And it would be like, yeah, like, right. Because I would want that thing to be bigger or more interesting than what was really going on. So I had a lot of empathy for Sky, who just wants her life to be different and better than it is, and her desire to kind of shape that reality. So I don't know if that made it better or worse, Marianne, but I don't think that you're alone in that. I think as an author, you have some choices to make, which is if you are marketing or something in a particular genre, you may choose to skew a little bit different, or you have to figure out how you're going to find your readers. How am I going to market to those readers and figure that out? And I think you're 100% correct that people can be sympathetic and critical of different things. So one of the things that comes up in romance that is like do not do is cheating. Which is interesting because if you look at the number of people who have affairs, like it's a lot, but it becomes the thing, particularly in a romance, like that is an unforgivable thing. And I think it would be a very interesting romance book about maybe a couple that got through that, or how does that happen? And again, I think people would be more forgiving of the husband that cheats and the wife that forgives him than they would be of a wife that cheats.
I mean, then you instantly cross over into women's fiction. I mean, I've read many books like Carol, she lives in Vancouver, Carol
Mason?
Yeah. So she's written a sympathetic character who cheats. And and then you follow that whole thing through. And she doesn't end up with the guy she cheated with, I don't think. But it's about her journey. It's about what she learned. It's about how was she going about being a married woman, and what was it that pulled her away from that, and what did she think she was going to find in this affair, and then what did she learn from that, and and how she grew as a person. So it's not a romance per se, even though there are large romantic arcs within it. So I don't know. I mean, I think you just simply cross that line, and yeah, it's maybe about marketing so that the right people are attracted to your book.
And I think Carol Mason is a really great person to, I actually know Carol, so I was supposed to have dinner with her tonight, but strangely enough, she snowed in. So we're not doing it till next week. But one of the things that she talks about a lot was she was picked up by Amazon's imprint, which name escapes me at the moment.
Lake Union.
Thank you, Lake Union Press. And they have done an amazing job with her books. And she was doing okay, but they've taken her really sort of next level. And if you have a chance, I don't know if some of her old covers are still available, but looking at how her books were marketed versus how Lake Union has chosen to market them, and they have clearly gone where they are, I think, trying to set a tone that is, this book has gray zones. And it is clearly not a romance. And I think her earlier covers looked a little bit more romance cover. And I think she got more readers who were then like, well, that's not then what I'm looking for, because they came into it and then it was like, no, that's not okay. And then we're turned off. But when she found the people who were looking for that, right, which again, whether or not where you personally stand on whether or not affairs are, forgivable or not forgivable, the point is that it's interesting to see someone go through that journey. I mean, I'm writing about murder, right? So I'm writing about, people who are making, I don't think there's any confusion that that's a wrong choice, but I think it is interesting to see how a character might come to that. That's why I find a lot of, shows on investigative discovery or court documentaries interesting, and sort of how lawyers will look to build a case, because if they can build empathy for the person who committed that murder, they sometimes get them off, or they sometimes get a lighter sentence than someone who isn't able to sort of build that case. So I almost would say one good way to think of yourself as a writer is to sort of imagine that you are your character's defense attorney. And how are you going to build the case for what they did? And is that because there's things in their history that explain who they are? Is it that they have a mental health issue that impacts how they react? Or is it that you're going to build a case that, yes, she killed her husband, but these are all the reasons: he was hitting her and doing all this kind of stuff. And even though she, if you guys remembered The Burning Bed, which was a big made-for-TV movie, it was based on a true case where there was a woman who had been abused for years and years and years. And finally, one day when he was sleeping, she set him on fire. And of course, what the court was arguing is it wasn't self-defense because he was sleeping at the time and therefore was not hitting her. And of course, certainly what she was arguing, the defense was arguing, is that this pattern of abuse for longer and longer periods of time, that she did not feel that she could get away. And in fact, that she had to then strike out. And regardless of which way, whether you think she was justified or not in that crime, it's interesting to think about how that was laid out. And it would also be interesting to say, would your perspective of that change if it was a husband who burned his wife alive, even if she had been abusive, but she was physically smaller? Like, would the perception be like, well, he still should have been able to get away? And thinking about how those perceptions play into a lot of how we view characters and people and all of that.
Yeah, power plays into it, and that's bigger than just one person or one couple. It's societal.
And it's what we think is okay or not okay. So you will see, talking about a very different kind of crime, but they will talk about rape. My dog has a perspective on that. So if we were talking, for example, about rape, one of the things that we look at is there are men who are sexually assaulted who are very reluctant to bring it up. Because people will, laugh. They'll say that can't happen. They'll say, well, he, obviously he wanted to participate, or he wouldn't have been able to participate, right? But of course, the truth of the matter is, it is also the same. Like, your body can respond in a way that is not necessarily associated to whether or not that you're wanting to do that particular act. And then you can get into all sorts of politicians that would say, well, you can't get pregnant unless you in some way enjoyed it. I don't know if you remember some of those kind of great comments that were being bandied about, right? But there are people's sort of thoughts and perspectives on things, some of which are completely skewed, and some of them which are just kind of hardwired into our sort of societal expectations, i.e. that, men are more likely to cheat, and it's, boys will be boys and that kind of stuff, and you can forgive them. But if a woman cheats, it's unforgivable. And I mean, that goes all the way back to the idea that of paternity, which is why it was so horrible if women cheated. It was because a man might not know if a son was his or not his. And we're still carting that around. Like, we're still like, we have DNA now. If you're really concerned about if the kid's yours or not, we can figure that out. But we tend to still see it as a much bigger transgression if a woman has an affair as compared to a man. And that has to do with, it's a woman's job to forgive, and, boys will be boys, and all those kinds of expectations. And I think one of the most interesting things we can do as writers is sometimes play with those expectations and have people thinking about things in a very different way. which can open up and kind of make those things very interesting to explore. But you're going to have to find the right reader, because if I'm sitting down and I think this is a romance and I've picked up the romance, which is not to say this is a reason that all people do, but I think a lot of romance readers, the reason that they pick up the romance is escape. I want to imagine that I am that heroine and I'm in this situation, and that the man that I'm with is this hunky, wrangler or whatever, and we're going to have this great love affair. And that's what I'm looking for. And if you're putting me in complicated emotional situations, that's not what I wanted. To me, it's the same as if you tell me to close my eyes and then you're going to put chocolate pudding in my mouth, and instead you put in gravy. It's not that the gravy tastes bad. It's that I thought it was going to be chocolate pudding, and now I have a mouthful of beef gravy, and I'm doing that like, right? Like it's going to be like, that was not what I thought I was getting. Not bad, just wrong for what I had sort of set my mouth to. So that is why I think, particularly when you are making choices to indie publish, that you're really thinking a lot about cover and tone and look and feel, so that people know what's on the back cover blurb, that people are going to have a really clear idea. So the book I was talking about earlier, The Hanging Girl / One Lie Too Many, one of the reasons that they rebranded it was, if you remember the initial cover, it's very dark. It's like the outside of a building, and it looks like words are carved into it, and it says The Hanging Girl. And I had concerns, which no one listened to, but that's all right, that the cover looked too dark. And when it came out, my concern was that people would think it was a horror novel. And in fact, I got a lot of feedback that some people thought it would be about suicide / The Hanging Girl. And so people had a very idea about what it would be. And I think for some people, then I wasn't finding the people who were looking for a YA kind of thriller. Whereas I think this cover works better for that, because I think it sets the tone way better. And I'm going to be very interested to see how book sales compare. And if I had to do it over again, and, things that I'm learning, as I go through my own career, is to be way more vocal about my feelings with that. I was talking recently to a writer, I won't say her name because I'm not sure she wants it public, but she writes domestic thrillers, and she's very successful. Like she's, USA Today and all those kinds of things. And she wrote a new book, and the initial cover that they put on it, it looked like a Paris hotel room with this sort of fluttering white curtain. And the book does deal with an affair. So I think, and it was a rumpled bed. So you could see like the rumpled bed and this like flowy white curtain. But it's about murder, and it's about like, she was like, no, right? Like this doesn't work. And then they came back where they basically tinted the picture. So now it looked dark. So it looked more like it was a Motel 6, but it was still a curtain and a rumpled bed. And so we had a big laugh about like, do they have money in the curtain like industry, like that they're so consumed with showing this curtain? And now granted, she also had like a lot of conviction, and she was already a New York Times bestseller. So I think she probably felt more comfortable than maybe I have in the past, but she came back again and she was like, no, I do not want, it is not dark. This is not working. And they went back the third time, and they came back with a cover that she now does like, and I think does reflect the tone and the feel of the book. So really thinking about it and, getting feedback and asking other people, like telling them this is what the book is about. Does this make you feel like that? Like, does it work for you? Does it feel like, and if the answer is no, then, pushing back to your traditional publisher, sending, what I think can be helpful is sending them copies of stuff that you do like. If you're working with a cover designer and you're indie published, like look at the books that are similar to what you're wanting to do and sort of send those kind of things to the cover designer and being like, this kind of thing is what I'm looking for. Can we find something similar to this? Thinking even about simple things like, would changing the color of something make a difference? Again, on the new cover, the initial draft they had was the girl with her hands over her mouth, and we all liked it, but I worried it looked a little bit like playful. And I was like, I wonder if there's any way to make it darker. And then the person actually burned the edges all the way around. And that did it for me. Like, that was like, now it feels like there's just an element. And my book is not, like, for clarity, it's not like it's super, super dark. But it just, to me, that gave it just that tiny little bit more of a creepy factor, which is what I wanted, that I felt kind of cues people that, okay, this might be something that you want to take a look at. So that would be something that I would consider as you're thinking about taking it out. You have a question, Marianne?
No, I'm just really, really hot and I want to go in the pool. So I'm checking the time because I'm not sure I'm going to make it.
You can, you know what, you could just go to the pool. We are almost at the last. I'll see if anyone else has any questions, but
I thought you were going to say you could just go to.
I've thought that inside my head, mostly because I am looking outside and like, I want to go to the pool too. Like,
any consolation, I'll be back in the snow by tomorrow evening.
Okay, I feel a little better with that. And actually, I think it's awesome you got away. Like, what a smart plan you had. So good on you. So, yeah, nope, good plan. Just take it. It's the universe speaking to you. You deserved it. But we are almost at that time. So while Marianne gets into the pool and cools off, does anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
I have some thoughts and questions. Yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing all of this and sort of how it relates to visual art as well. And that sometimes, especially if you're doing a commission for someone, you're doing it with them, an audience of one, really. But how that can go awry as well. And that you think you're doing something that they will really like. In theory, they've come to you because they like your work, but it's not necessarily so. They want you to get what's in their head and put it out. And I think it relates to writing as well, that depending on who you've chosen to read your work, often it is that audience of one. And I think most of us aren't trying to write for an audience of one. We're trying to write for more. Case in point, I'm doing a piece for one of my very best friends. I've known her since high school. And she wanted me to do something for her bedroom based on what she said she liked of my work. And I thought, okay, this should be easy because I love this woman. I've known her for over 40 years. And it is probably one of the worst experiences of my life. Not that it's, awful and full of tension, but it's just like, I'm not giving her what she wants. I'm giving her what I think I should be creating. So the other day, I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to make you paint this with me. So this is going to be something that we do together because I'm not able to write this story on the canvas myself. And so that's made it better, but it certainly isn't creating something that is mine. And I think we have to remember that in our writing too. But I also wanted to show you my latest piece. And this is to say, Happy Valentine's Day.
Oh, how pretty.
Roses for all of you.
That's gorgeous.
Valentine's Day tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, to cycle us all the way back, which Christy did a lovely thing of doing, is ultimately I think we write for ourselves. And that's what you have to do because otherwise you're doing work for hire, which is not a bad thing, but it's someone else's story and you're writing it the best that you can. So if you're not doing that, then fundamentally you have to write the story that you want to tell. When you're taking it out and getting feedback, whether that's from an editor or for beta readers, you're always going to have to filter that through about whether or not the feedback resonates with you. And that may mean going back to the same editor to see if it worked. But if in any way your gut is giving you that feeling, I think sometimes there's a lot to be said for, all right, I need a new eye on this. And that could be because the fit with the editor might not have been exactly right. Or it could be what you're looking for as a writer is different than what they were delivering. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's just what you're looking for. Or it could be like, I know this is so different. I just want someone who has not seen it to look at it, who's coming to this with nothing, no expectations, no nothing. And there's something really wonderful about that. So do it. All right. So everybody else, get your shovels out. Marianne can get into the pool. And until then, I will see you guys next week and around the Creative Academy. Happy Valentine's
Thanks, Eileen.
Day. Bye.
Hang in there, everyone. See you soon. Bye.